Thank you all for being here today. My name is Kim Kronk, and I'm Millcraft's marketing manager. We're excited that you're here, and we know there's a lot of things that you could be doing right now, and we're really happy that you chose to spend your time with us today. We're honored today to introduce Greg Lovensheimer, our president at Millcraft. Greg has over 40 years of experience in the paper, print, and graphic communications industry, having begun his career at Mead Paper. His extensive background spans the entire spectrum of manufacturing and distribution processes, from starting as an operator to roles such as supervisor, trainer, capital project manager, Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, product manager, director of operations, chief operating officer, and now our esteemed president. In addition to his role at Millcraft, Greg served as a former board member of Two Sides, and is the very recent past chairman of the board for the National Paper Trade Association. His wealth of knowledge and leadership have been instrumental in shaping our company and our industry. We're excited to share valuable industry news and insights with you today, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us. So thank you all for being here, and please welcome Greg Lovensheimer.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. Hey, I appreciate as Kim said, we know you got a lot of places you can spend your time. Thank you for spending your time with us. We will open up the mics after we're done here. We've got about 40 slides to get through, believe it or not. Lots of stuff going on. As I looked over the registration list, I was humbled to see so many great industry veterans, sign up. And so that represented folks from customers, suppliers, and competitors alike. And so thank you for, again, entrusting us with your time. Of the folks that registered, 36%, the largest majority, are actually printers. And so love that, because, again, sometimes as an industry, we don't get a lot of visibility down to the printer level. And so appreciate the fact that you guys are all on here and that you do ask questions either verbally or in the chat or even afterwards. So that's really great to see. We have almost 300 registered attendees for this call. And so, again, I hope that's a testament to the fact that you guys all see value in this. Just a reminder, my job here today is to be apolitical, right? I'm not red, I'm not blue, I'm not left, I'm not right. I'm here to speak as an industry advocate, right? My job is never to speak fear, right? But to really give you maybe some actionable insights and maybe educate you along the way so that you're best prepared to handle whatever's coming down the road, right? And really to allow us as an industry and you as individuals within that industry to really be able to thrive in what would otherwise appear as a time of chaos. I always like to start, if you're a longtime listener, we always like to name, the trend that you see going on in the industry, right? And so how would you describe it in one word? This one probably took a little while, right? And it's really pressure, right? I see it, as pressure. It's not good, it's not bad, it is what it is, right? And so the last time we spoke, believe it or not, was March Madness, the crazy thing. And now we're talking in the middle of the FIFA World Cup. And so we're talking about pressure, right? Going from the group stage into the knockout rounds, that pressure is building. And so there's pressure all around, not just in our industry, but just in society today. That's just the harsh reality. And sometimes pressure comes in an unequal impacts at times. And really pressure is defined by force over area, right? And so, so Greg, what in the world are you talking about? What kind of pressure are you talking about? From an industry, think about it though. We've dealt with a lot of cost pressure here probably over the last, call it 6 months, right? And it's also manifested itself in pricing pressure. And what do I mean? The difference between cost and price. Cost is what happens to you. Pricing is what you're able to affect on your next link of the supply chain up, or your customers, if you will. And so that's how I always delineate. And as I looked at some of the comments that you all made, it looks like you guys delineate that way as well. It's supply constraint pressures are real. And you'll see that here when we start talking about operating rates, and that structural decline pressures, those are real. How are we dealing with the long-term structural decline of commercial print, and how are we pivoting What is the industry looking at, and how do we continue to make ourselves relevant, and how do we make sure that, as the overall economy moves, we're able to lift all boats and not just some boats. And credit pressure, because the reality is, talking about unequal pressure, we know that some folks are thriving under the pressure, and we know that some folks are, succumbing to the pressure and experiencing a lot of credit-related issues. And so, one of the things I always like to start with is that word, but I also like to hold myself accountable. What did we say when the last time we were together? It's one thing to get up here and pontificate for 45 minutes, right, and tell you everything that I think. It's another to say, here's what I told you, and whether it came true or not, or, how did it, the things manifest themselves from the last time we talked. So we'll talk about, what did we talk about the last time, so that we've got some basis of authenticity and that our comments are genuine. We'll talk about, where we are and what's changed. I always like to talk about the high level forces, and then individual printer issues, and then paper market insights, and then always try to help you, okay, given all those, what are some actionable, methodologies or prescriptions for success and potential wild cards to be mindful of. So the last time we spoke, we used the word, are we turning a corner, right? And again, it was March Madness, believe it or not. And we talked about this idea, are we turning a corner, right? And whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, and whether there was an accident coming around the corner. Because the reality is, when the last time we spoke, we used this term uncertainty because the Iran conflict had just kind of occurred within the last 9 days. It happened 9 days prior to us talking the last time. And so it was all still very fresh in our minds. We may have been starting to feel good about maybe we were turning a corner for an optimistic view, but the tariffs had been struck down at least from the IEEPA standpoint. But what did that mean going forward? And so, for the most part, I think we were spot on in terms of talking about that the uncertainty from the Iran conflict would probably cause things to pause. But man, there were a lot of things that were pointing up, right? And without those kind of external shocks, things may have been dramatically different for the good, right? So also, I always like to hear from the community. So I always like to reach out and talk to folks. Again, never want to be in an echo chamber. And so I reached out to several of the folks in the industry that I know and trust, and I've got a pretty good pulse on the industry. And so, one printer in Central Ohio talked about the fact that, business is good. It's not great, but it's good. It's not stellar, but it's steady. We're having a better year than we had in 24 or 25, but it's not like crazy 23. We believe the second half of the year was going to be at least as good as the first. So that was interesting. A distributor in the Southwest made a comment, April was great, May was not good. We look at our order rates for the second half of the year, they're strong, and they appear to be comparable really to historical July to October levels. Again, that's great news, right? Everyone's pointing up towards that back half of the year. And the last comment, printer in the Midwest, it's soft right now. There's not a lot going on in June and July, but we had a good first half of the year. We've seen sales growth through contracted accounts that have made a difference. And I thought that was an important distinction that they made, is that, we all have contracted business and we all have kind of spot business, or, that transactional business that just comes in. And it's interesting that, printers are looking at it saying, how do I build out contractual pieces of business that allow me to have some programs associated with it? And so I think, as the industry continues to mature, I'm seeing that more and more, not only on the printer side, but even as Millcraft, as we deal with customers, we're working on supply agreements. And even as our suppliers are talking to us, we have supply agreements as well, really trying to stitch together a durable supply chain that is, can stand the test of all these challenges we all face. And we also get insights from you all. Thank you. When you register for this, believe it or not, you're asked a couple questions, and they may seem innocuous to you, but they help us get an understanding of, well, who in the world's joining. Like I said, I was, pleasantly surprised that our largest majority, 32%, are actually printers. But then, what's everyone's expectations? And so, kind of comparing when we were in the first quarter, right? When we were comparing in the first quarter, this is what you all said as you registered, right? That you were 62% of you were expecting 26 to be better than 25, 32% to be the same, and only five, worse than 25. Compare that to what you guys all just completed, right? The 300 some folks that registered. Only 40% of you said that right now 26 is better than 25. That's down from 62. So 22 points lost just in the second quarter. Again, think about pressure being unequal, right? Maybe more over here, maybe less over here. 42% said the same as. So, a 10% increase over what folks were seeing in the first quarter. And then here's the one that's really, interesting, the fact that instead of 5% thinking the year was going to be worse than 25, that number is now 18. Again, it starts to strike this idea of, not all boats are of equal size and shape and, durability, if you will. And that, different folks are, at different points along their evolution in terms of changing and diversification and/or contractual versus transactional. Here are the words that you all used, and I always love these too, right? Because again, words are sometimes paint a wonderful picture, especially when you put them in a collage like this. And so we asked the question: what were the biggest drivers, both pro and con, that were currently impacting your business, right? And so you can see pricing, cost, demand, and then increases, market, budget, economy, economic, inflation, global supply. They're all in there. And it's all the things that we've been talking about, right? So the good news is, I think we're on the right path in terms of we've got our finger on the pulse of what's really going on in our industry. And it's really trying to understand what are those drivers going forward in a lot of these areas. And so more times than not, it's the big picture elements that drive change and issues, both positive and negative, on our industry. So it's only appropriate that we start there. So if I look at the high level forces, those macro level forces, right now, you can't go anywhere and not talk about the Iran conflict and what that means for oil, right? So let's talk about oil. Where is it at right now, right? The great news is oil is absolutely coming down. So as of yesterday, Brent crude was at $77 a barrel, and West Texas Intermediate was at 73. So it's well on its way down. And you can see the dramatic drop, in terms of where it's at. That, Brent crude is down 22% for the month, 20% for Brent crude. But year over year, oil pricing is still up 13% year over year. So if I compare this time frame now to where we were setting, last year, there's still a 13%, about a 13 to 14% differential between those two. But look at gasoline, and I think this was a little bit of what President Trump was talking about when he talked about, is there gouging going on in the marketplace? Because gasoline is actually up 40%, right? And so that there seems to be the volatility in gasoline going up is one thing, but the volatility in gasoline coming back down, it appears to go down a whole heck of a lot slower than it rapidly went up. And I know there's a lot of folks that talk about, well, it has to do with the oil reserves, right? So I gave you this chart, right? So these are our strategic oil reserves over here. That's what this kind of chart represents over here. And so, yes, guess what? Our strategic oil reserves are down, but they're no further down than where they were last year at this time. So it's an interesting fact that we've been strategically bringing down, quote unquote, our strategic oil reserves all of last year, right, to help correct and balance out the domestic oil supply. And as a result, low gasoline prices, right? That's the pro that we all experienced. We started to rebuild them, and obviously the Iranian conflict, and then, they've now dropped as those have been released, out to try to help with gasoline. So again, let me boil this slide down for you in terms of, we talked about oil and diesel being one thing, but that domestic freight is really much, much more than that. And don't be overly simplistic here. in terms of, thinking that the domestic freight market is only about diesel. It's not. It's about driver capacity, driver shortages, right? It's just not a desired field these days. Compliance pressures with the driver clearinghouse, drug testing, all those requirements, they've all had an impact along with diesel. And you can really see that in terms of the cost per mile down here, that just since November, and so I like to use November as kind of, it would have been the end of peak season last year. And right now, at least in the Midwest, we're still up 83 cents a mile. So, $3.09. And you can see in the Southeast, right now, the Southeast is the most expensive at $3.20 a mile. That's $1.33 more than November. So this situation isn't going to remedy itself anytime soon. And even if diesel improves, truckload freight's still going to be expensive. And I would expect truckload freight to be expensive through the third quarter. So at least through September, probably well into October. That's the way it looks just from a kind of shipment to capacity basis. And you really start to see that here because you have this inversion, if you will, of spot rates being above contracted rates. And so that's another indication that right now the market is extremely tight. If you don't have contracts, right, they can make more money right now on the spot market than they can in the contracted rates area. And you're really starting to see this in terms of just some of the things that you're hearing in the marketplace. So I don't know how many of you are, subscribed to blogs or podcasts or whatnot. I know I'm a little goofy that way. This was an interesting one by Dawson Carty, just in terms of, since 2024, the crazy thing is U.S. truckloads have dropped by 21% in terms of the length of the mile. 607 miles was the average in 2024. It's now down to 500. 11% of that decline has happened just in the last year. So trucks are going shorter distances for these full truckloads. And so, is that a little bit of, congestion? Is that, what is that? And so there's this idea also that shorter loads, though, should help with the shipment to capacity because you should be able to cycle those trucks a lot faster. But the reality is that what it looks like is that the longer haul routes are really these observing intermodal, right? They're absorbing the intermodal piece to the puzzle, right? And so that's what's really moving. And you're seeing this, 11, 14% up year over year of long haul actually being switched to intermodal, trying to improve responsiveness over rail, right? Which is interesting again. And I don't think those conditions are going to, improve anytime soon. In terms of ocean freight, here's the other piece of the puzzle, right? So yes, diesel absolutely affects ocean rates as well, as do port congestions, as do, the fact that we're still a little bit upside down in terms of where assets are around the globe. So a little about $4,000 per 40-foot container, or $7.50 a hundredweight if you're buying paper, is tied up in ocean freight alone. That's not even inland freight, please. So this is just $7.50 to move it across the globe on average from point A to point B on the port side. And that ocean freight rates are at their highest in 18 months, right? And yes, there were, just like we see, kind of gas surcharges or diesel surcharges or fuel surcharges domestically, they're called emergency bunker surcharges, is the term that gets used in the ocean freight, the ocean container world. And those are set to kind of roll back beginning July the 1st. As diesel starts to come down, these rates get set. So hopefully July 1st, we'll start to see some relief. The question is how much relief is really there. And right now, the Straits of Hormuz, are they open? Are they not? It really all depends, more believe it or not necessarily on the Houthis or the Iranians as much as it does the insurance companies. Those folks that are insuring the vessels, they'll be the ones that determine when is it safe to really start making that transportation, because they will insure that asset as it moves through the strait. So right now you're starting to see insurance rates coming down a little bit, but that'll be the real tipping point more so than any political theater that you're going to see. So speaking of other theater that we've seen here just in the last week, so Kevin Warsh is the new Fed chair, right? Unfortunately, we also lost Alan Greenspan. I think it was Monday of this week. Over 100 years old. We owe a debt of gratitude to him in terms of what he did in the Federal Reserve starting in '96 and taking us through the '90s into the early 2000s. And he was really the one that helped identify this idea that sit tight, don't raise rates when you start to see inflation move up because it may be productivity gains, right? And we're starting to see that here. And there's a case to be made for that, especially as AI starts to kick in. Regardless, what you're seeing is the inflation rate right now is at 4.2%, right? That's what the core CPE is. Our consumer price index is at 4.2. We'll show you PCE here in a second. The Federal Reserve rate is 3.63. That's the blend between 3.5 and 3.75. That's their holding rate. And really, it was good news that the Fed held steady last week as they, they're, again, depending on who you read, Bank of America is calling for 3 rate hikes the balance of this year. I would be hard pressed to believe that. And again, you can find anybody who's got an opinion one way or the other. There's a couple that are calling for 1 rate cut coming in December, not 3 rate hikes. So it's a little bit of who knows at this point. The good news is staying steady is a good thing. If I look at really where the producer price index, you can see it moved up as well. So it rose 6.5% year over year in May, which is obviously a step up. But think about how much of that was really driven by the price of oil, right? There's a rule of thumb that says for every $10 in the increase in the price of a barrel of crude, you get 0.2% rate in inflation rate. And so if that's the case, think about it. It's moved as much as $50 a barrel. And so, we could be seeing, $100, or excuse me, a much lower interest or inflation rate had oil not done what it's done, and how much of those are secondary effects. And so, again, we'll see once oil comes what really happens to the inflation rate. But, again, it's just it's a good thing that we held tight in terms of the interest rate. The unemployment rate is holding steady at 4.3. And again, this is where they call it the Greenspan playbook. Don't overreact to a number. Most folks would say right now that, believe it or not, 4.1% is considered full employment. Most economists would say that in terms of where we are, especially with the amount of immigration that's been thwarted. You're not looking for a number that's in the 3s. You're looking for a number that's in the mid to low 4s. Also, it depends on what state you're in, right? So, we're happen to be based in Ohio here today, and it's a decent economy, right? With inflation rates somewhere around 3.5%. But if I go to Chicago, you're over 5%, or Michigan, you're over 5%, or New York over 5%, or California, you're over 5%. And so it matters where you are as well in terms of what state you operate in. And I know from a printer standpoint, this is one that can be hard because, our industry is such that we've got a silver tsunami going on. We've got people that are retiring out, and we've got to be able to replace them. And so trying to find qualified workers that want to work and will show up 2 days in a row is problematic, as most of you can attest. And so paying attention to that unemployment rate is extremely important. I know several of you are, working on how do I automate my business? How do I improve it so that, I'm not as exposed to, needing so much talent, because it's going to become harder and harder to find qualified bodies. There is a watch out, though, in Washington, D.C., and it's, believe it or not, it's Congress. And so, these are 2 slides that I find very interesting, just in terms of the number of days of government shutdown that have occurred in 2026 compared to 20 years prior to, right? Kind of crazy. And then look at the net approval of Congress, right? It's at its lowest point ever. basically at a negative 76 on the index. And so that's the crazy part. And so the concern that I have here, and the reason I list this as a watch out is remember that the government works on a fiscal calendar. The budget resets as of the end of September. And so to think that Congress can work together to put together a budget that it can pass and implement by October the 1st. And so, most folks in Washington right now are expecting a full government shutdown coming in October, as a new budget deal is probably pretty highly unlikely given the stark contrasts between the political parties that exist in Washington. And so this is a real watch out, right? It's one of those things that, as much as we say all the positives that are going to come after this, this is the one, another wild card that can be worked into the mix. Because other than that, the numbers look good, right? You start looking, peeling back the onion, the economy is solid, right? The Conference Review Board showing a positive trend, right? We're no longer in recession territory. There's no one talking recession these days. This is the numbers from December. And I just ask you to look at, folks were a little bit indifferent, right? So there were things that were up, there were things that were down. Everyone was just kind of waiting. Obviously, the consumer was very negative, right? The consumer was very negative in December. Well, here's where we set in May. Guess what? Things are now really starting to move up across the board, except for what? The consumer. My question for you to consider is how much of the consumer is what the media is, feeding the average consumer? Because what you're seeing in the manufacturing environment, again, especially in the next couple of slides, it's not what the consumer believes is really going on. And so there's a growing dichotomy, if you will, in terms of what the average consumer believes and what manufacturing in the U.S. is really starting to feel. And so this one's going to be interesting to continue to watch at and poke at, that, the average consumer expectation is moving more and more negative. And so you can watch the University of Michigan Consumer Confidence Index that'll be coming out here in the next couple of days. Pay attention to that. And again, you get a lot of it depends on where are people getting their information, where are they choosing to get their news. Not saying it's one versus the other. I'm just saying that's a stark reality in terms of being that negative when numbers look good everywhere else. What's a good number? Let's start with the Institute for Supply Chain Management and their Purchasing Manager Index. Manufacturing is 54% on their index, right? This is more importantly, it's the 5th straight month in a row of growth following 10 months of contraction, right? This is our best reading since May of 2022. Think about what was going on in May of 2022. We were all running around, on full allocation. We had more orders than we knew what to do with. We were all trying to figure out, how do we react to what's going on here? That's what the data would say is going on in U.S. manufacturing right now, right? And of the 16 manufacturing industries that reported growth in May, guess who led the top of the list? Printing and related support activities, right? So printers, we should all be seeing growth because that's what the U.S. Census data would say, right? That's what folks are reporting, not only in census data, but in survey data as well. And listed fourth there are paper products, right? That, the paper producers are seeing growth. So that's a big number. That's a massive number. Remember, we've been, floating along here somewhere closer to 50, hoping to get to 50. The overall break-even economy is at 47.5. Anything below that line indicates recession. Again, we're not even close to recession. This would say the economy is really starting to move on an upward trajectory. And if you start breaking that down into its individual components, new orders, again, at the top of the list, printing and related support activities and paper products. So we're seeing new orders with a 56.8 on the index. Production, again, printing and related support activities led of all the 14 industries reporting growth. Printing was number one, 54.3. Employment, right? Of the 18, printing was number one. We go to prices. This is the one that I think you can all attest to. This one's huge, right? In terms of seeing a number that high again, how much of that is fuel? How much of that, price bump is related to energy, related to oil, and even imports as well. And so again, I would ask you to reconcile what does the consumer believe, that negative consumer confidence, versus what does manufacturing appear to be showing, right? That, man, there are some really good things going on. And so most economists would actually peg the U.S. economy right now at this late cycle expansion, right? You're really starting to see, heading towards a peak. Is there another run beyond this peak? But most businesses run in this cycle. And from the the commercial print space, we're about 6 months behind right now. It's what it looks like. Somewhere in that, mid stage of recovery. And so that's the good news is, hopefully if they think about the comments that some folks had made early on, talking about expecting a really good second half of the year, this data would indicate that is highly likely at this point. But there are risks that are out there besides Congress, right? Besides Congress, there are risks that they need to make sure that you're aware of and plugged into, and more importantly, that you're advocating for, right? We all have an obligation in the industries that we serve, whether you're in the printers, whether you're a distribution channel, whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're an end user. I would ask you to advocate with your industry association, right? Because these bills that I'm going to talk about here, they will affect us in one way, shape, or form. You cannot stand still. These things will absolutely have effect. So we're going to talk about extended producer responsibility and the Financial Disclosure Act of 2025. Let's start with EPR, right? And please, if you need to understand what EPR is on a much deeper level, feel free to reach out, right? So we'll have an email at the end. You can call me, email me. You can email the address that we've got. Reach out to your sales rep, reach out to your suppliers. It's extremely important that everyone in our industry understands what is extended producer responsibility, what does it really mean, and what effect can it really have on us? Because the reality is, most of our municipalities don't have the money to do recycling and to do it at the level that needs to be done. And so without having pockets, American, government system starts looking for, all right, well then who are the folks that are potentially putting those things that need to be recycled into the waste stream, and how do we get them to kind of fund that? And so you're seeing these packaging or extended producer laws really start to become in vogue. Not saying they're right or wrong, right? Saying it is absolutely a viable way to do it. I think what's misguided here in terms of the concern from an industry standpoint is how they're going about it, right? There is, paper and paperboard is one of the most recycled materials on the planet, right? Generally speaking, year in, year out, you can look at AF&PA data and would say the numbers, probably closer to 68 to 70% of all, papers get recycled. And so it's a waste stream, and at the end of the day, it also composts, right? So even if it is left behind, you put it in your garden and it'll, break down biologically. That's not the case with other items, right? But you've got these extended producer responsibility laws that are really going into effect in certain states. Right now, there's 7 that are active. And really, Oregon is the tip of the spear. So my hat's off to Ed Allen of WCP. He is the tip of the spear in terms of challenging some of these laws, just in terms of how they're constructed, right? And here's what I mean by that. And this is why it's important for you to understand. So there's a group of it's an NGO, if you will, and they're the ones that are actually deciding. They're kind of judge, jury, and executioner. They're called the Circular Action Alliance. And if you look at the members, you look at them and go, oh my gosh, that's some of America's best and finest companies, right? That absolutely do put products out into the marketplace, and they should be concerned about the waste stream, right? Absolutely. You're not going to get anyone who has any doubts about that. It's kind of how they go about it, right? This group is responsible for, again, developing the legislation framework. Basically, they're writing the language of the law and then handing it to the lawmakers to simply adopt, because they're saying, hey, we'll develop this, we'll set the fee schedule up, but yet there's no disclosure on how it's calculated. And then they're responsible basically for program administration, and you can't take them to court. You can only arbitrate with them, right? Because that's now mandated. And they're the ones that are actually collecting the fees. And then obviously they're the ones that are collecting those fees and then giving them back to the governments, obviously less their expenses, of course. And it's really, this is the root of the issue here, is that, again, everyone in our industry, and I'm certain you will agree, everyone wants to do the right thing for the economy, the sustainability. We all owe it to the next generation that come after us to make sure we leave the planet in a better place than what we found it. It's just sometimes the legislation gets a little misguided. So pay attention. There's a lawsuit that National Association of Wholesale Distributors that we are a part of has enjoined. And again, Ed Allen of WCP is the tip of the spear. And Ed, we wish you the best of luck and thank you for representing the entirety of the industry as you go on basically give your testimony in terms of what this means. So pay attention the week of July 13th, probably the trial lasts at least a week, but it has far-reaching effects in terms of what this means for Colorado, what it means for California, what it means for Minnesota, Maine, Maryland, and there's a bunch of states that are teed up, ready to go. So what can you do about it? Again, get engaged with your industry association, whether that's the Graphic Media Alliance, Great Lakes Graphics Association, Pius, you name it. Find a way, engage and advocate for our industry. And then there's also House Resolution 2441 and Senate Bill 1877. It's called Improving the Disclosure Act of 2025. And so this is an innocuous bill. Sounds like grandma and apple pie, right? Improving disclosures, right? Who's against that? But it has far-reaching effects in terms of what it could mean for the print industry, and the fact that it would basically make electronic the default for all SEC and basically all government documentation. That all of a sudden, as an individual consumer, all of my contacts with my brokerage firm, whether it's my bank or whatnot, automatically get tipped to electronic, and I have to actually opt in to get those documents back, right? And so again, not saying it's not a bad thing, but it's probably misguided in terms of the key provisions. And so again, I would ask you, please advocate, please work with your industry association and to understand where they stand and what they're working towards, whether that's contacting members of Congress. That's generally the best way. All right, so enough about geopolitical issues. Let's talk about really what's going on in the marketplace. March and April shipments came in at 7.2 billion. That's really the lowest level since the spring of 2024 when you look at it on an actual across the country. Again, these are census numbers produced by the Federal Reserve out of St. Louis. Great January. That was actually 0.7 above the fourth quarter, but it's kind of absolutely has fallen off to now, the print industry in terms of the volume that is being produced is below 2025 at this point. Now contrast that with paperboard container production, right? It's now approaching $8 billion. And notice that, yes, it is volatile, but it is absolutely moving up. And so this is that plastic to paper phenomenon that you're starting to see. And so, if you're in the print industry and you're trying to understand where, what should you be looking to do? How do you help diversify your business? I would say start looking at packaging printing. And there was a great webinar that was put on by, onprintshop.com. They talked about, key difficulties that commercial printers are facing. We're talking about a lot of those here, right? And then key commercial print trends, if you will. And they're talking about the key growth drivers really were, guess what? Packaging printing, labels and stickers, large format, and textile printing, right? Print is absolutely changing. It is less reliant on mass market advertising and print runs, but it's more focused, right? It's more personalized and it's digitally integrated across other advertising channels. And print still matters, and print does in fact still move the needle, right? So we've got a wonderful industry. We've just got to help pivot given the pressures that we all face. So let's talk about the pressures on the paper side, right? On the actual paper itself. Reminder, you're going to hear me talk and throw terms out. If you're not used to them, here's kind of a simple primer course in terms of, you're hearing me talking about uncoated free sheet, are coated free sheet. That just means the lignon's been removed. They are not groundwood. They are free sheet. They're generally brighter and whiter, and they don't have reversion, or they don't get that yellowing that you would normally see in like a newspaper that's left on the driveway for 24 hours. Compare that to uncoated groundwood and coated ground, which the lignin is still there, but it is generally serving a kind of a short-term purpose. And you'll see it in a lot of magazine catalog papers with SCA+. You can also see it in manuals, things that may not necessarily be exposed to the sunlight. And, even, groundwood, some of the, catalogs and mailers, again, short-term purposes. So again, making sure that everyone stays grounded in these terminologies as I start to use them here. If I look at where demand, where the apparent consumption of, printing papers is really at, uncoated free sheet right now is about a 5.3 million ton market, right? So great April. Started to come back in May. And so was this a little bit of a pre-buy, right? This is the question that I've got, is that big of a jump from kind of March to April, and then followed by, a little bit of a decline. Is that pre-buy ahead of the price increase? But it's a 5.3 million ton market. Look at coated free sheet, actually improved, went from it's a small move from 1.9 to 2 million, but again, is absolutely improvement. And so that's great to see in terms of the demand on the consumption side. If I look at imports, the interesting thing is with the IEEPA tariffs being overturned in February, you're really starting to see some numbers come in March. How fast could you get some of these container ships loaded up by the time that thing was, finally the ink was dry? You really saw a huge spike. That 20% of the uncoated market in the month of March was actually attributed to imports. That number is still very steady, around 35% in the coated realm. And so, again, just something to be mindful of, because as we all have talked about over the past year or so, North American supply is unable to keep up with all of the demand, and so we need imports. It's just some kind of steady level of imports, and obviously that's hard given where ocean rates have been. If I look at operating rates, because this is the one that really starts to tell the difference just in terms of related to inventory. Inventory has dropped. Uncoated free sheet down to 34 days, right? That number was probably closer to, that one's been fairly stable. It's the coated one that's dropped dramatically from 32 days. That number was, closer to 45 days at the turn of the year. And so you're really starting to see, this is why coated free sheet is, beginning to go on allocation. So SAPI is absolutely on allocation, but you'll also start to see others here. And I'll explain in this next chart why I believe that's so. Not that I'm speaking something into existence, but you look at the numbers, and the numbers will tell the story, right? Coated free sheet inventories have kind of fallen into a typified pattern, slightly more so though than 25 levels. And uncoated free sheet has really been steady at around 34 days. But if I look at the operating rates, because this is where you see price increases, this is where you see allocation, or this is where you see the market start to get loose. It's depending on where everybody's operating at. And so, again, as a reminder, a mill cannot operate at 100%, right, for very long. It can do it for short periods of time, and it means drawing down inventory, meaning if I'm a 400,000 ton mill and all of a sudden I'm selling at a 410,000 ton rate, I just didn't make 10,000 more tons. I'm probably pulled in at least 10,000 tons of inventory drawdown. Moreover, the machines in my mill have to shut down periodically. So most folks would say somewhere around 90% is full, right? So 90% means the industry is full. And so you can see uncoated free sheet right now is above 90%. It is absolutely tight, and everyone is absolutely on allocation. But look how much coated free sheet has come from what was the mid 70s to now approaching 90% in terms of its operating rates as well. So this is why I say right now all uncoated free sheet suppliers domestically are on allocation, and I think you'll probably see in short order some others start to join SAPI in terms of being on allocation, at least domestically, on coated free sheet, because again, The inventory has dropped to where it's dropped. Consumption remains solid at around 2 million ton market, and you're seeing operating rates start to push above 90%. And oh, by the way, we're moving our way towards the seasonal uptick of July, August, September, and October. And so that all manifests itself again in terms of a pricing forecast of probably pricing stability more than anything else. So I know with folks thinking about, well, hey, if diesel's going to go down and energy is going to go down, should I expect my pricing to go down? Really, probably not. You should probably though expect some level of stability in pricing as you go through here. And so this is RISI data, and they're kind of forecasting, looking out the balance of the year at least, probably for the next 18 months, next few quarters here, pricing stability, right? And so kind of putting all this together and trying to put a neat little bow on it, right? I believe the industry's poised to respond to the pressure we're facing, right? So demand patterns, they're probably, sometimes, I think by the third quarter, they will improve dramatically. I'm already hearing stories of folks that are seeing political print demand. That is obviously, it's going to be a highly contested election here, a midterm election. Be interesting to see how much print is used. The largest primary in U.S. history just occurred in Kentucky. Thomas Massey, I think there was $134 million that was spent. There wasn't a lot of print associated with it, and so there were a lot of people that were concerned. And so, it'll be interesting to see going into the fall general election at midterm how much the political advertising finds its way to print. So expecting demand to be, somewhat normal seasonality-wise, but expecting supply to still be tight, right? So that's why I say, I think, allocation continues in uncoated free sheet. Allocation will probably expand in coated free sheet. Yeah, you're going to see oil and fuel, probably help a little bit, but there's really no excess inventory to give, right? So you're going to see these cost pressures that are going to remain, right? And so, graphic paper demand is stalled, but just like the rest of the U.S. manufacturing, I truly do believe it's beginning to rebound. Okay, so what should you do given all that, right? As I said, engage and advocate. Please, please, please reach out to your members, your Graphic Media Alliance or, PIAS or Great Lakes Graphics Association, and make sure you're educating yourself on what EPR can do and what the Financial Disclosure Act of 25 can do. Partner, right? Find supply chain partners. The future belongs to supply chain partnerships, not individuals trying to weather this, collective storm individually. That's really collaborate and really start playing chess, not checkers. Evaluate your market approach, right? The UPS, the United States Postal Service still has some great discounts. Are you taking full advantage of them, right? Decomplexify. How do you make sure that you're not the only one in the country using a single grade, color, basis weight, or size, right? Making sure that you're viewed as being, a product or a grade or a customer that suppliers like to have around, right? There are obviously wild cards that are out there, right? We've talked about a couple of them. What are the wild cards? Obviously the Iranian conflict. We all would hope that that one's in the rearview mirror, but you just never know. It seems like every day it's a little bit of a roller coaster ride. And so just like with the American consumer, that one is probably top of mind for the American consumer. And remember, the American consumer, believe it or not, is 70% of the U.S. economy. So what the American consumer thinks absolutely does matter. Oil, where's oil headed? We would hope that's pointed down, but obviously that plays a huge role in terms of what that means for inflation. Congress, paying attention to Congress and the U.S. Postal Service, I kind of blurred them together there, if you will. Basically, governmental agencies, making sure they're a help and not necessarily a hindrance. And then interest rates, hoping that, Kevin Warsh and the new, Fed chair governors really look at it and take a long-term view and maybe not look at 3 rate hikes like some may have been predicting, but really looking at the data similar to Alan Greenspan would have and said, how much of this is because that there are some, productivity gains that are being, improved because of AI and because of some tools that have been put in over the last several years. And then last but not least, and again, this is not political, this is just reality, right? The tariffs, where do they come, right? So there's been concern, or there was the threat, if you will, that, if the European Union didn't adopt the trade bill, there would be some tariffs that would be put in after the 4th of July. It looks like that's moving forward, and the European Union has come to a deal. It's just got to get signed and ratified, and it'll be interesting to see if Congress can actually ratify that trade bill, and if they'll actually let that go through. But again, you just never know. And as we've all experienced here over the last several years, that is absolutely, one of those things you just need to be prepared for, because it will be unique. Obviously, Millcraft, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't have at least one slide that a little bit of an advertisement. We're working our tail off at Millcraft. We really are. We're working to protect our customer supply chains each and every day. We are sourcing across 22 countries, believe it or not, and that we're trying to make sure that we're committed to growth, innovation, and sustainability. We've got durable supply chains that we put in place, along with an incredible technology stack that's powered by Microsoft. And so we truly believe that we are a long-term competitive advantage for our customers. And so again, reach out, and would happy to get into a discussion in terms of how Millcraft is, all the challenges that I've identified, how Millcraft is helping to step up in each and every instance to try to bridge that gap and abate that risk. All right, wrapping up. The paper industry continues to show improvement. The conflict in Iran has lasted longer than anyone really hoped for. We should expect to see oil-related prices start to ease, right? Supply chains, though, do still matter, though. So making sure that you're looking at, where is that grade, and if tariffs move at all, what does that mean, right? Because that's still not fully understood in terms of where tariffs are going to go to. Substantial supply chain constraints and uncoated free sheet still exist. I would expect coated free sheet to see kind of an allocation across the board, especially as these operating rates get to above 90%. And partnerships absolutely do matter, right? For the lowest total cost of ownership, rather than just a simple transaction price. And so would love to help folks understand how Millcraft remains committed along the way. And then last, got a quote for you, right? So yeah, we talked about pressure, and we talked about the World Cup and the pressure. Here's what I would say. Remember, pressure makes diamonds. But more importantly, this was an interesting quote that I remember hearing Billie Jean King say. And she said, pressure is a privilege, and it only comes to those who earn it. And I thought this was really profound in the fact that, if you're not in the game, if you're not on the court, if you're not in the arena, there's no pressure, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. And so pressure is absolutely a privilege. And so I know that you all feel pressure, but think of it as a privilege that you're doing the right things for, whether it's your company or whether it's your industry, or whether you just care that much to try to make tomorrow better than it was today. So hopefully you found that helpful. Again, now's your turn, right? What questions do you have for me? And then, again, that industry updates at millcraft.com. That's the email I just asked. If you've got questions, if you've got comments, if you've got thoughts in terms of, hey, next time you do this, could you add this or take this out? That's where I would ask you to add it. Kim, turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Greg, and great job on the presentation. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read those off. The first one is from Deborah Korn. We have, are there any paper categories or specification strategies Millcraft is recommending more often because they deliver a great balance of performance and value?
So it's a good question. So that she's the, if I'm not mistaken, she's the Print Universe ambassador of the Print Universe. I think that's Deborah Korn's title. And you could actually probably take her off mute if you want to, or take them all off mute if you want to at this point. Here's what I would say. We're probably trying to put as many customers in domestic supply chains as possible just right now. So we're looking at domestic first, and then also trying to look at of the global ones that are out there, which ones are sustainable and durable and who have a long-term right to win. We probably do probably a really great job that we probably undersell ourselves. There's several of us at Millcraft that really get in the weeds and really understand what is a supplier's cash cost to operate, so that we can, when we make a recommendation to a customer, it's from an educated position that says, yes, you can take a transaction, and right now that guy is cheaper, but over the long haul, this is the one that's the most sustainable. And so, Deborah, I wish I could answer your question specifically, but if I had specifics, I would absolutely be able to help. But right now, it's kind of just generally speaking, staying domestic is helpful just because of the global uncertainties, tariffs, where fuel is right now and what that means in the ocean rates. There's just a lot of volatility right there. Thoughts on the Postmaster General testimony to Congress? I thought he was spot on. I thought, for those of you that haven't heard his testimony, he basically said the postal system will be bankrupt in a short order, and that think about their unfortunate scenario. They're the only public entity that has to be self-funded, so they get no funding from the federal government. Yet the federal government has the right and say so in terms of how they spend the money they make, in terms of what they need to invest in terms of that they're. I think the number is, if I'm not mistaken. Let me stop sharing because I've got the stats here to prove it. It's an insane number of post offices that are actually they're not profitable, right? 71% of all U.S. Postal Service routes are unprofitable. 58% of U.S. post offices don't cover their cost of operation. So why are they still operating? Right? Why are they still operating? They're operating because Congress wants them to be. Right? And think about, a lot of times a post office in the middle of, wheresville, Ohio is there because the local congressman doesn't want to explain to constituents that it doesn't make financial sense for that post office to really be there. And so, unfortunately, they lose money in the process, right? And so at some point, there's got to be a little bit of a reckoning here in terms of, you can't have that much, craziness going on in terms of, here's the slide itself. Share. Appreciate the question. There it is. You guys can see that. So I'll fill in all the good stuff here. Right. Congressional oversight with no financial contributions, right? They have more oversight. Believe it or not, this is the crazy thing. They have more oversight on them than a monopoly does. Because at least a monopoly can make money, right? The Postal Service can't make money. They're obligated to operate 33,000 post offices, and like I said, 58% don't cover the costs. They're obligated to have 6-day-a-week service, right, to cover more than 169 million mailboxes. Yet 71% of the routes lose money. And here's the crazy thing: they can't ship alcohol, right? I don't know about you. You may be a teetotaler, and bully for you. I like alcohol, right? And the fact that the Postal Service can't deliver alcohol, but FedEx and UPS can, that's a head scratcher, right? Think about how much money, how much market is out there if they could just move alcohol around. So yeah, I love what Postmaster General David Steiner said, right? And he told them the truth, and they didn't like it, but he's not wrong, right? Sometimes the truth hurts. So, great question. And Deborah, you're absolutely right. Collaboration is absolutely key, right? I had Travis Malacher, who's our CEO, once said, and I never forget it. He said, as an industry, we're playing cards, right? We're all gambling here, but we're all holding pairs of twos, right? And instead of just us having a pair of twos, how do we put them all on the table and say, how can we make a better hand collectively as suppliers and partners and customers, and come together and say, how do we make the best hand possible? It's not about me, lying to you when I'm sitting there holding a pair of twos. Other questions, Kim?
There were a couple. So one from Robert, who asked, any idea of unemployment by age group?
It's a good question. I will get that, and I'll actually we'll add that as a slide to the deck that we send out. I've had that in the past. I did not include that here.
Excellent. And then we've got another question from Todd who asked, what items are included in the $100 in-stock guarantee program? Is there a stocking list available?
Yes, Todd, absolutely. There is, I think the number is 300 and some items. They're in the $100 in-stock guarantee. And quite honestly, I'd love to pay it out, right? I know it sounds crazy, but Millcraft, our job is to be in stock. About 85% of what we do comes off our floor, and that's the value that we provide. Is we've figured out all the shocks that are going on in the industry. We're putting it on our floor. We're the one willing to absorb that risk, and we're in stock. Just ask, right? And so I'll absolutely get you, Todd, that list of stocking items.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. And then we have a question from Dan. Automation is at the forefront of print manufacturing, more specifically AI, and how it can help our businesses. Recently, we engaged in a trial of a specific software manufacturer in the print MIS space who are
manufacturing information systems.
Got it. Who are working with paper distributors to integrate into electronic catalogs. I've been told it's on Millcraft's list of priorities. Can you expand offline? The vendor.
Absolutely. So yeah, we are internally. It's called Project North Star for us. We've developed a series of use cases for AI. AI is just like a lot of things. If you're not sure what your business and how you think it's going to make you better, it can be a little bit of an expensive boondoggle, right? And I love my IT friends, but sometimes they like to do the stuff that's really cool and interesting and fascinating to them as zero business value, right? And so we're trying to take it from the standpoint of what are the business cases? What do we need to work on? Where do we need help? How do we become more efficient? How could AI help? And so really starting with the business first, developing the business cases and saying, okay, now let's go build the AI to meet those business needs versus saying, hey, we got this tool over here. I got this hammer. Where are all the nails that I could go hit with this thing, right? So a little bit of a different approach. But yeah, we'd be happy to engage, Dan, offline in terms of how we can integrate, because we've been doing more and more of this. Because again, it's the whole analogy about everyone holding a pair of twos. And our catalog should absolutely be available to all of our customers, because our data should be your data. Just like what we're trying to do with our suppliers. I was just on a call earlier this morning with our supply chain team trying to say, how do we take our suppliers' catalogs and just ingest them into our system so that our data is transparent, right? And so think about all the waste that go in, because we're all running ERP systems, right? Even if it may be small in scale, but you've got to feed that beast. You've got to give it master data to make it run. But you're doing all that work when the data already exists. It's just in someone else's database. How do you get that out? That's absolutely a wonderful value add. Would be happy to entertain a project towards that.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to either add to the chat, or you can come off mute if you'd like and ask directly. We'd love to have a direct dialogue with Greg if you'd like. Now's the time.
Hey, Greg, it's Todd. Quick question,
Todd.
And I may have missed it. What are the current container rates compared to a few years ago? Are we seeing a decline? Are they steady increasing? Any insight on that? I may have missed it. Sorry.
No, it's fine. So yeah, container rates right now are about they're at their 18-month high where they sit right now. Let me find that slide. Sorry. It was right after the ocean freight rate. There we go. You can see that right there, Todd. So about $4,000 a 40-foot container, or about $7.49 a hundredweight. It's the highest in 18 months. We would expect to see bunker fuel surcharge. So that's just a fancy way of saying a fuel surcharge. ocean industry is steeped in tradition, and there used to be coal bunkers, believe it or not. So that's why they call it a bunker surcharge. There's no fuel bunkers anymore. It's fuel tanks. That gets reevaluated the 1st of July. And so I would expect those rates to start coming down based on that. But they're still pretty elevated right now. Think about, especially if there are tariffs that come off, most markets are supply and demand driven. And so, demand could spike here, especially as we do expect to see seasonality because of the tariffs being somewhat low, that we would expect to see seasonality in that you're going to start to see, August and September and October, containers really start to flow in the United States for, the fourth quarter holiday season. All right, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, sounds great. Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you all for choosing to spend your time with us today. We know you have a choice of where you spend it, and we really appreciate you spending it with us. If you do have any questions at any time, please don't hesitate to reach out to your Millcraft representative or send us your questions to industryupdates@millcraft.com. We're always happy to help. We wish you all a great rest of the week, and we hope you enjoy the upcoming weekend. Thank you all again.